Hi everyone, welcome to our third AB Vote Hangout at abvote.ca. I'm Mac Mail, better known online as Master Mac, and we've got with us three special guests tonight. It's been an interesting evening. We've had the address on television from Premier Prentice, a response from the Liberal Party, and we're looking forward to a pretty interesting discussion tonight about that and much, much more. So once again, abvote.ca, we're going to be taking questions and comments from all of you online throughout the show. You can do that on Twitter using the ABVote hashtag. And now I'd like to let Dave introduce himself.
Thanks, Mac. My name is Dave Cornway. I am a political blogger, and I write the daveverda.ca blog, and you can find me on Twitter at Dave Cornway.
Okay, and Ryan, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ryan Hassman. You can follow me at Ryan Hassman, and unlike Dave, I'm not a blogger or a logger.
And Ryan, you have the honor tonight of introducing our guests.
Yeah, so again, we just want to thank the three of you and maybe take a moment to acknowledge that Brian Jean is not able to be with us tonight. I'm sure all three guests will join us in saying we deeply regret the situation with this.
Through the magic of the internet, Ryan is somewhere else, so his internet kind of comes and goes, but it looks like you may be back now, Ryan.
Am I back?
You're back.
Hi. Sorry. So Derek Fildebrandt is with us. He's a Wildrose candidate for the riding of Strathmore.
Oh, lost him again.
Okay, Ryan, I think we may let the other
Drew
folks
Barnes
do an introduction for themselves because we're losing you a little bit here. So why don't we have each of you just tell us who you are, where you're from, who you represent, and maybe a few words to start us off. And Derek, can we start with you?
I'm Derek Fildebrandt. I was the Alberta Director and National Research Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation for the last 6 years. Job I couldn't ask for a much more fun a job than that, where I got to fight waste, corruption, and higher taxes in the PC government here. And, eventually I came to the conclusion that these guys don't need a tinkering, they need a tanking. And, myself, I felt pretty strongly about the events of December and decided to become a Wildrose candidate myself. And I'm supporting Brian Jean for the leadership of the party. I'm not here speaking for myself. I'm here speaking for Brian Jean today, who, for reasons we all know of, cannot be here. And is attending to those matters currently, but I'll try to do him justice in his place.
Great, thank you so much for being with us. Drew, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely, thank you very much. Drew Barnes, I'm the MLA for Cypress-Medicine Hat, which I'm grateful to the people of Cypress-Medicine Hat for the opportunity to represent them the last 3 years. For 5 years I've been a Wildrose member, had the nomination for 18 months before the last election in 2012 in Cypress-Medicine Hat, had the opportunity to interact and talk to many, many Albertans, many, many Wildrose members, and had the opportunity as a Wildrose MLA to be our infrastructure and transportation critic, also our ESRD, finance, education, and advanced education critic. And I'm also a University of Alberta graduate from 1983. I'm a family man. My wife Frances and I have 3 boys. And for the last three years as an MLA, and for the last 5 years, I've been fighting this wasteful, high-spending government. And interesting tonight that our Premier announced Alberta healthcare premiums and coal maintaining the lowest taxes. Sure looks like a tax increase to me. And I guess we'll see where that's at on Thursday.
Great, thank you, Drew. And last but not least, Linda, would you like to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Sure, I'd just like to welcome everyone to the Hangout. This is the first time for me, so thanks Dave and Mark and or Mac and Ryan for the introduction and allowing us to do this. And yes, lots of prayers and thoughts for the Jean family. My name is Linda Osinchuk, and I'm running for the nomination to be MLA here in Sherwood Park, which is just immediately east of Edmonton. And my background, I've been municipal mayor of Strathcona County, and it was a $250 million corporation. and for 12 years was either a counselor or a school board trustee, but also was involved with the Industrial Heartland when they were seeking revenue coming in to Alberta, and was instrumental in leading a group to Qatar and to Ukraine to look at 5 specific companies coming in. So experience has been there. I'm a registered nurse, professionally trained, and worked in the system for many years. So I bring not only the experience, but actually the passion. And Wildrose is definitely one of those parties that has been for the people. And as leader, I would continue to represent that. And so it's great to be here.
Great. So thank you all for taking the time again to join us. I hope you all had an opportunity this evening to watch the Premier's address. We'd like to start there. We're going to dive right in. So just going to mention a few of the notes that I took while I was watching. He talked about a 10-year plan, which he says will be introduced with the budget on Thursday. He talked about needing to get costs in check, but also improve the revenue gap. He talked about changing the percentage of energy revenue that goes toward program spending, first to 75% and then to 50%. He talked about maintaining the province's lowest taxes in Canada. He said explicitly there will be no sales tax. And he talked a bit about needing to make some decisions in the immediate term as well as for the long term. So I'd like to hand over to Dave for the first question for everybody on the Premier's address.
Yeah, thanks, Mac. So we heard right after the Premier's address, we heard interim Liberal leader David Swan with a response, and I was just hoping that each of the our guests tonight just take a minute. If you could just take a minute or two and share your thoughts or your response to what the Premier said tonight on the televised address. So I guess I'm not sure who we'd start with. If you want to start with Derek, maybe.
So we're responding to the response here.
Or your response, or not necessarily your response to David Swan's response, but you can comment on Swan's response if you want.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Well, just to start with David Swan, I thought it was unfortunate that Mr. Swan took up the Premier on his offer of participating in a supporting role in his infomercial. I was very proud of Heather Forsyth and the Wildrose caucus in rejecting the Premier's offer to participate in a taxpayer-funded commercial like this. I thought it was inappropriate in the extreme. But I think the Premier overplayed his hands here. If he was to get away with doing this and not looking too crass and spending $100,000 of taxpayers' money on this infomercial, he should have probably done something like what a president of the United States does, and stand in front of a podium or at a desk and give a real speech. Instead, this was very clearly a highly produced commercial with infographics, different angles. God knows how many times this was rehearsed. But to the response of what he said, I think this is a radical departure of the rhetoric the government has used in the months leading up to this budget. I've been expecting the government to bring in significant spending reductions and significant tax hikes at the same time, sort of a pacify the left and the right move. What this is showing, that he's just going to hold the line on spending rather than actually reduce expenditures but continue to hike taxes at the same time. To me, I guess I'll play Dave's role for a second to put on my pundit hat for a second. This signals to me a pivot, at least for the moment, of pivoting left to fight the NDP in its strongholds, in reassuring those voters who fled to Alison Redford last time to stop the Wildrose that they're still safe with the left side of the PC party. This leaves a huge amount of political real estate for the Wildrose party here, as the party. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in a campaign office, so I've got phones ringing in the background. This leaves a lot of political real estate for the Wildrose party to demonstrate itself as the party of fiscal restraint, of fiscal conservatives, that we're going to have to put forward a plan in this election to balance the budget without raising taxes and by cutting wasteful spending. So I think overall, politically, it leaves a lot of room on the right side of the spectrum for Wildrose.
So now, Linda, I mean, touching on what Derek said, I mean, it seemed that leading up to this announcement and leading up to the budget on Thursday, there's been a lot of trial balloons. The Premier and the Finance Minister have been dropping a lot of hints about what may or may not be in the budget. They originally hinted at cuts, maybe tax increases. Do you think there's a lot of managing expectations going on, or what from the Wildrose perspective, what do you think's going on here?
Well, it's very obvious that these trial balloons really is a test for most parties or any leader that tries to say, I'm going to go for the high number of taxes and see what happens, and then they're going to say, oh, by the way, you know what, we'll just put in health premiums, and everyone's going to go, whoa, oh my God, thank God it's not something larger and something, like sales tax. So it's an old-fashioned type of ploy. That you float as much in heaviness and out there, and then you come back with, the small platitudes. So, I hope Albertans, for one thing, I mean, this is a tradition that we've seen with every premier, and Wildrose have been very successful in fleshing out the last two premiers of all the misspent funds. So this is not a surprise to see the premier on TV. The cost of it at this time, I think we're all looking for cuts. I know that I was saying that being there and getting an opportunity to probably say what Wildrose is in the middle of in leadership, and that we're not dead. We're actually very viable. So it was a ploy. It was a trap. And yes, I do congratulate Heather very much and the team for stepping back. But traditionally, the promises are always put before an election. And again, we've all experienced many broken promises. So it's easy to promise, but then it comes down, it never happens. Where are the schools? Where are the hospitals? Where are the, all the particular infrastructure they were promising? So if I can say anything, it continues to be the high promises, and I just said be leery, because Wildrose definitely will say what they mean and mean what they say. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. Now, Drew, your comment. You've been an MLA for the past 3 years. You've at least been in the legislature with Prentice since October. What did you make of the speech tonight?
Well, no surprise. Prentice has ran around for months now talking about taxing everything that moves, but making no real decisions, destroying business confidence and the confidence to attract capital. Clearly, the differentiation between the Wildrose Party, our members, and our policy is the fact that several months ago we came out and said absolutely no tax increases, absolutely no new taxes. And it's not necessary. We have the most expensive government on a per capita basis in Canada now. We spend almost $2,000 more per person per year than the Canadian average. If that spending was brought into line, there would be ample protection for the taxpayer. Again, I think what I heard Prentice say tonight, although he didn't come out and say it again, he talked about an initiation of a healthcare premium, starting smaller and then going higher. He said that we're going to still maintain the lowest tax jurisdiction in Canada, which suggests to me that will eliminate our 10% flat tax. And Dave, what we need to know is Albertans already pay the second highest per capita income tax in the whole country. Our 10% flat tax provides revenue for the government, provides incentive for the workers. Sin taxes on alcohol and tobacco, we're clear that he's going to come with those. And the idea of putting some money into the Heritage Trust Fund is in a lot of ways an excellent idea, but it looks like what he's planning to do is more of what Redford was doing, and that is saving at the same time he's borrowing. And it doesn't make any sense to borrow on your credit card at the same time to do some savings. A real simple stat that I've told a lot of Wildrose members in the last three weeks is if this Alberta government would have just saved the interest that the Heritage Trust Fund has made since 1976, the fund today would be worth $220 billion because of compounding. If we had a fund of $110 billion, making approximately 8% a year, that 9 or 10 billion a year that it would come in every year in interest would equal what we make annually in oil and gas royalties. That alone would take us off a large part of the oil and gas roller coaster. This PC government's had 44 years to do that. It's not under new management. It's been waste and entitlement for far too long.
Dave, any follow-ups from you on that question?
I do, but I'm going to first. I'm going to pass it over to him, and we can continue on later.
All right. So Ryan, you're up.
Sure. So in case I get cut off, I'd like to hear from each of you. What would bill number 1 be for a Barnes or Osinchuk or Jean government?
Okay.
Let's start with you, Linda, if you're
Okay,
ready.
that sounds great. There's 3 areas I'm going to be focusing on, but I guess bill number 1 was to develop a stable and sustainable fiscal framework. Again, a framework that actually looks at revenue sources and expenditures. Very much what we were hearing is always platitudes about where things are going to go forward, but we never see measurables. We never see results of initiatives, other bills. So I would challenge the government at this point to actually show us exactly the successes that you have, and I think we need to have those particular measurables. If any corporation or any business would actually continue to perform that way, they'd be bankrupt. And these are taxpayer dollars. I think the taxpayers deserve a real frugal and pragmatic approach to a fiscal framework. And it looks like possibilities of having Alberta bonds, or even looking at a restructuring, or even looking at what the royalties really do, and so that investment in industry can be stable. It's not a question of increasing royalties. This is a whole aspect of a whole framework, and also making sure that the revenue coming from other aspects like agriculture and our industrial heartland and value add, so that we can actually keep our jobs and products here. So number 1 would be actually a stable and sustainable fiscal framework policy.
Thank you.
Okay, and next, why don't we hear from Drew?
I'm sorry, Ryan froze on my computer. Can you paraphrase the question for me, please?
He's really looking for what bill number 1 would be in a Drew Barnes government.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's bill number 1 in a Drew Barnes government. For me, it would actually be property rights. There's 4 things that a government needs to have to diversify the economy and to build a strong economy. First of all, it needs competitive tax rates. Secondly, it needs minimal bureaucracy. And third, it needs stable, low, competitive priced electricity. And then fourth, it needs the rule of law best reflected by property rights. When Prentice wanted to be premier, he said property rights were so important that he would fix property rights. Bill 36, the Land Stewardship Act, absolutely left the draconian portions of the Property Rights Acts there, including where landowners don't have access to the courts to appeal a decision of the government. Secondly, they don't have access to full, timely, and fair compensation. And thirdly, if the Land Stewardship Act conflicts with another law like the Expropriation Act or the Surface Rights Act, then it has the trump card. We need property rights and government that knows its limits, not that can grow into the private sector. Likewise, Bill 24, the Carbon Capture and Storage Act, exactly the same. When Prentice wanted to be premier, he said he was going to make these changes, and he hasn't. So Bill 1 for me would be to finish what Prentice said he was going to start.
Okay, and last but not least, Derek, what would bill number 1 be in a Brian Jean government?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Drew has said on property rights, and share a lot of those views. However, I think in terms of timing, it's quite obvious what the first bill of a government should be. If we're having an election immediately after a budget is tabled but not passed. Bill 1 of a Brian Jean government, and I'll have to guess what Brian Jean would do, but I think it's quite obvious Bill 1 of any government after this election is going to be the budget. And that is going to be the fundamental document that shapes everything we do for the next few years. We need a bold budget that balances the budget, stops our return to debt without raising taxes. What we saw tonight, I think, should remind a lot of people of... oh, sorry, not sure if that's your campaign calling, Drew.
I better answer it then.
Well, you know, that speech reminded me a lot of what we saw with the McGuinty government or the Pierre Trudeau's government. A budget that kicks the can down the road to balance the budget 3 or 4 years down the road. Getty did the same thing. You know, you promise to hold the line on spending and raise taxes, but you avoid the really tough work of cutting wasteful spending right up front. A Bill 1 should be a budget that eliminates corporate welfare. Drew touched on this. The carbon capture and storage program should be axed. The Northwest Upgrader and the massive subsidies that have been awarded to that facility just because it is a large PC party donor should be eliminated. You know, spending on golf courses at a time when we can't get good long-term seniors facilities in Strathmore is just a really poor placement of our priorities. So budget 1 should focus on balancing the budget in a timely fashion, stopping our return to debt, and doing so without taxes.
Okay, sounds good. Before you jump in again, Dave, I'm going to go with a question here. I was listening intently during the Premier's address and then Swan's response. As you may know, I'm more of a city guy. I'm very interested in municipal politics and what's happening in Edmonton in particular, but across municipalities in Alberta. And we didn't hear a lot from Premier Prentice on that subject. He did talk about the need to continue spending on infrastructure. But Dr. David Swan did specifically say chronically underfunded municipalities need stable, predictable funding from the province. And so I'm interested from the three of you in your thoughts on that. And if you had the opportunity to talk about the relationship with municipalities tonight, what would you have said? And Drew, maybe we can start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that question. One of the main Wildrose policies the last 3 years has been our 10-10 plan. Many municipal councillors and mayors really like it. The whole idea behind the 10-10 plan is a Wildrose provincial government would flow 10% of provincial revenues through to our municipalities. We would do it with maximum flexibility. The way the current system works now, the PC's MSI money it's not as guaranteed as it could be, it's not as consistent as it could be, and there's many patchworks of grants that cost municipalities thousands and thousands of dollars in people to write the grants, to apply, to wait and see what the answer will be. So we spend a lot more time and money wasted in bureaucracy. The legacy of this PC government the last 10 years is the bureaucracy and the absolute increase in size and bureaucracy. The second half of our 10-10 plan is 10% of all future surpluses would also go to the municipalities. Absolutely, I think a wonderful idea. If the provincial government's in a situation where it has a surplus, most likely it's because the economy is booming. And if the economy is booming, there's a lot of stress on the infrastructure of our municipalities. This would allow local decision makers, local people who can get their hands and their contracts around some better values to actually have the money where they can do these extra things that need to be done. Alberta infrastructure is also very interesting. I was infrastructure critic for about 2.5 years, and my last report was called On Time and On Budget, and it clearly showed how in Alberta our government spends about $1,800 per year per person on infrastructure. Ontario and British Columbia only spend $900 per person per year and get considerably more value. Our government does things like not having a public prioritized infrastructure list. It doesn't pre-approve contractors. It doesn't properly allocate risk. It doesn't spend consistent amounts so our good contractors can't plan their capital, their men, and their mines and their machines. And there's so many things that our government could do, that a Wildrose government could do, that would give the taxpayer of Alberta a lot more value for their hard-earned money.
Okay, thank you. Derek, you want to jump in with some thoughts on municipalities?
Yeah, no, I'll echo what Drew has said about the Wildrose's 10-10 plan and on time, on budget. I think they're solid policies for building infrastructure and supporting municipalities without needlessly taking us into debt. You know, the plan to finance 4/5 of all of our capital budgets in this province through debts is very short. It's short-sighted. It's a plan to build infrastructure for 2, 3, or 4 years, after which point we're going to be paying so much money in interest that that we're going to have to pare back how much we're actually spending. Long term, I believe we'll actually end up spending more money on important infrastructure projects if we do so sustainability and paying for that today rather than putting that burden on future generations to pay. You know, the reviews to the Municipal Governance Act right now are pretty interesting. Most of the people being heard, though, are just other politicians, not the people who are going to end up paying the bill. Not ratepayers, not taxpayers, but other municipal politicians. Now, a lot of those politicians have the absolute best of intentions, and they're frustrated because revenues to municipalities have not been stable, they have not been predictable, and so naturally they want to take things into their own hands. And some of them want to take them into their own hands by taking out of our hands, by raising taxes, and I don't think that's right. I think the MGA review needs to focus on providing a more stable source of funding. We need to let municipalities share in surpluses. When the province is running surpluses, which we haven't for a very, very long time, municipalities should join in that, rather than having a small check cut from time to time to try and bribe them. One of the real fundamental problems with municipal governance in this province right now is that municipalities feel the need to suck up politically to the government of the day. That's one reason you saw a lot of municipal politicians buying tickets for fundraisers or golf courses for PCMLAs and ministers to get access to them. You shouldn't have to be politically connected to the ministers of the day to get funding. You shouldn't get a bonus check based on how well connected you are or the price of oil of the day. So let's give municipalities a share of surpluses as a general rule. But the MGA review needs to really focus not just on how much more money politicians can take out of our pockets, but on how they're taking that money, how they're reporting for it. And I have a lot of concerns that the outlines of the new MGA that are being tabled right now by the government actually weaken accountability measures. The ability now of a lot of municipalities to not have to publish changes to local regulations, to land usage regulations in local newspapers. Instead, they could post them on the inside of a bathroom stall and call that's publicly disclosed. So I want to see the MGA really focus on enhanced municipal governance, a municipal auditor general, not allowing the administrations to really wag the tail of the dog that are town councils in many cases.
Okay, very interesting thoughts on the MGA review, definitely. Okay, Linda, I'm sure you have an interesting take on this topic.
Yes, actually there's 3 key areas that I believe need to be concentrated on. And first one is a respectful relationship with your municipalities. We have 2 very effective and successful associations, the AUMA, the Urban Association, and the AMD&C, the Rural Associations, definitely represent their municipalities in their keen interest. So that relationship, as they're working with their provincial counterpart to have input, for example, as I mentioned, to the MGA, to city, Edmonton and Calgary are looking at city charters. This needs to continue that dialogue. Infrastructure funding that has been given through the MSI, which is Municipal Sustainable Initiatives, really comes as a grant. And when I mentioned the first bill to have a fiscal framework, it can come under there. We need to have reassurances to the municipalities who are charged to be the closest to the people, that when they have to put in infrastructure, that they can have the sustainable funding. So that was the second part, is the infrastructure. The third part is basically, ensuring, again, that stable revenue. But when we look at areas like the Capital Region Board, which represents 24 municipalities, or the area around Calgary, those municipalities, no matter if they're rural, specialized municipalities, or urban, they have very good input from their stakeholders, which is their, people and residents and their businesses. So let's bring them to the table. Let's ensure that we listen and we actually put some sustainable funding, but actually some reassurances going forward. The last part that I think the provincial government really needs to actually enhance is that ensuring federal transfer payments coming back to the province are in a form of, for example, infrastructure. We've been very successful at the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, to get gas tax returned from the feds directly to municipalities. Why not? Why not actually advocate for the municipalities to get funding from feds directly to the municipalities for infrastructure, roads, bridges, and LRTs. These are hard infrastructure costs for municipalities to handle, and I think it's important that some of our transfer payments need to come back to us. So I would advocate strongly to the feds to come back to the municipalities for infrastructure funds. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So we're about halfway through. If you're just joining us, we've got 3 of the Wildrose leadership candidates with us tonight. We're talking about the Premier's address and all other kinds of things related to the election. So Dave, I want to go to you next for the next question.
Yeah, so last year was a big year for the Wildrose Party for many reasons. When Jim Prentice became Premier of the PC Party, he appeared to launch almost immediately kind of a concerted effort to steal away, or to get rid of those wedge issues that the Wildrose so successfully used going up into the 2012 election. It was already mentioned, property rights were one issue. Obviously, the more recent controversies with former Premier Redford and the Sky Palace and the Plains, and I could spend the next half an hour listing those off. But I think a lot of people in the Wildrose Party approached his take cynically. What Prentice was doing cynically, until 11 Wildrose MLAs crossed the floor to the PCs, which came as kind of a shock to most anybody who was watching politics in Alberta. So my question is, now that the Wildrose Party has 5 MLAs in the legislature, is still trying to figure out, and you guys, this is what you guys are doing, trying to figure out what the Wildrose Party stands for and what will it bring forward in the next election and after that. So my question is to you, what would you do to bring back those people who've left the Wildrose Party, whether it's those 11 MLAs? I'm not sure if you'd want all of them back, or some of them, but in terms of the supporters who left and with the MLAs, what would you do to those people, or what would you do to attract those people back?
All right, maybe let's start with Derek.
Well, that was a really good question. The Progressive Conservative Party is a bit like the Borg. They'll assimilate ideas and even entire parties for the sole purpose of power. They'll attack left and they'll attack right as it suits them to retain power. Immediately, Jim Prentice saw his #1 opponent was obviously the Wildrose, the only party that had threatened the PC's grasp on power since 1993. And so he made some very tokenistic gestures to the right, but it seemed to be, someone just hashtag resistance is futile on this. That was well played, Ryan. He made some very token measures, and they were called token by Danielle Smith and those who eventually crossed, and now they're held up as signs of real action. And now, as I mentioned earlier, he's tacking left because he sees his opponents as the NDP. And the Progressive Conservative Party will always do so because its purpose for existing is existing. What distinguishes us is that we were real conservatives before Jim Prentice, and we are the real fiscal conservatives after Jim Prentice. Our ideas, our principles have not changed. Those in the Wildrose Party right now are here for the right reasons. We have not taken deals. We have not been bribed. We are here standing on principle because we believe this is the right thing to do, that we don't need a one-party state and we need a change of government. And I very much prefer that that change in government come from a credible center-right alternative. Now, I don't want any of those floor crossers back, personally. I think if you want to change parties, you should resign your seat and run the by-election. You can sit as an independent if you don't like your party. That's perfectly reasonable under our system. But I think you should run in a by-election if you want to change parties. I'm not focused on winning back politicians who had weak spines. I'm focused on winning back activists and voters who have left the Wildrose Party for one reason or another, sometimes even for good reason. And there were times when the Wildrose Party did not look like a viable governing option. After the by-election defeats, Danielle Smith herself became very unhinged, and a lot of people around her had very serious concerns about her leadership. I think some people expressed those concerns the wrong way, some expressed them in the right way. But we need to prove that we are a party ready for government. One-party states, like Mexico used to be, or India used to be, and I'm paraphrasing from someone on my campaign here who made a very good point the other day. One-party states that are nominally democracies, that have elections but seem to have one party in control of everything, have something in common. And that is that they're one-party states not because the one party in charge is brilliant, but because the opposition does it to themselves. When you're out of power, those in the opposition are often co-opted to join the government. They prove themselves worthy in opposition and they're co-opted by the government. Or, and more usually, they self-marginalize themselves. That some people in those opposition parties would rather be a big fish in a small pond and retain sovereignty over a small part of the political spectrum, but remain king of that political part of the political spectrum. I believe Brian has what it takes to see beyond that self-marginalizing attitude that opposition parties in one-party states have. He has been in opposition and moved to government. He has been through that process of proving yourselves worthy to the electorate who don't want to give a new party a try when there's been a party that's been in power for a long time. I don't want to be a part of a permanent opposition party. If I'm elected, I will be happy to serve in opposition because opposition is necessary. It's crucial to our democracy. But also so is changing the government from time to time. And I think Brian is the candidate who can move us from opposition to government at some point.
Okay, Linda, do you want to tackle that one next?
Sure. Really, the moves that Mr. Prentice did when he came in were low-hanging fruit. And, he still needs to prove himself with some of the completion of some of the bills. It was interesting, the pressure on Bill 10 when they first introduced it, after, of course, the Bill 202, and then let it hang, and it wasn't until public, pressure. And, I has been very, very vocal in regards to supporting the GSAs, and I think it's a right move. So the low-hanging fruit, if you want to call it, we got to remind Albertans, why do you want to continue being a Wildrose member? It was very much, we need to show what is our vision. Where are we going to take the province? Many people have said, don't keep on hammering at the, PC government. Show us what you can do as a government. So as a leader for the Wildrose, we need to I've been putting forward a vision and some policies and strategic plan that actually we have to embrace and empower our candidates. We have great candidates that are coming forward in every constituency across the province. But why the 9/11 crossed the floor? What deals were made? Again, we're not going to the past. We want to make sure Wildrose Conservative Party, who is fiscal, and yes, as Derek mentioned, we have that. Definitely the principles and values are there, but people want to see who they can trust. They want to see, a leader that actually can bring the team together, who can actually communicate, who has experience in regards to putting vision and policies together, but also who actually knows how to communicate and make sure it's not just a top-down, dominant approach that we see with the PC government. This is collaborative. It has to be partnerships, and it has to be one that is really much the Wildrose really embraces. So the thing is you know what, you can put an individual with initials JP on a steed, but it's still the same manure that steed is standing on. So people said they will not vote for PCs again. This was about a year ago when I took on the nomination for Sherwood Park, because they thought that all the misuse of the funds and all the mistrust that they had. So we're just going to remind people that Wildrose has proved themselves. They're great. They're a great opposition. They can be a great government, and we have to ensure that the people of Alberta has a place to go and they can trust. And so it has to be walk the talk and talk the walk. Thanks.
Okay, and Drew.
Okay, thank you. First of all, let's talk about my history with the Wildrose and the floor crossings. 5 years ago, after retiring from active business, I joined the Wildrose. 3 years ago, I'm grateful to win the Cypress-Medicine Hat constituency for the Wildrose. And for this period of time, continually for 5 years, I have held town halls, talked to Albertans, talked to Wildrose members about what's important. Never faltered. When the call came from my caucus mates to come to meet with them to discuss crossing the floor, I absolutely refused. I absolutely tried to talk all of them out of it. But at the end of the day, 11 people made 11 individual decisions. Your question to bring them back is two things. First of all, under my leadership, unifying our party, our 24,000 members, hardworking, everyday Albertans, looking for more value for their taxes, looking for a better Alberta for their kids and their grandkids, looking for a better Alberta for the next generation. One of the things that really attracted me to the Wildrose in the first instance was our grassroots focus. Under my leadership, rebuilding the right way, from the grassroots, one member at a time, one voter at a time, building the CA strong, building it so Wildrose members have an active chance to be fully involved in our party with their ideas, with their volunteerism, with their concerns, so we can all make Alberta stronger. It's back to our principles and the reasons that I joined the Wildrose in the first place for 5 years ago. Our principles of more efficient government, principle of less bureaucracy, healthcare that works. You know, healthcare every 10 years doubles in cost. If that happens again in the next 10 years, it will absolutely squeeze out the rest of our spending, or squeeze out the next generation, which a lot of Wildrosers feel is worse yet. Cypress-Medicine Hat, the biggest complaint in my constituency office is 3-year waiting lists for many surgeries. Many Albertans, many tax-paying Albertans end up going to Montana for these surgeries. So healthcare that works isn't only about the cost, it's also about the rationing and the inefficiencies. Free votes is something else that sets the Wildrose apart. We have lived to the idea where we can vote free, independent of our leader, independent of our caucus mates, if we feel it's in the best interests of our constituents. Time and time again I have done this. Time and time again I've seen other Wildrose MLAs do this. That is one of the key things that sets us apart from the governing PCs, as well as our other principles of fiscal responsibility, less bureaucracy, and healthcare that works. It's about the members. It's about the 24,000 Wildrose members that didn't leave us, when the 11 did.
Can I just mention something? I feel I'd left something out of my answer, if that's okay.
Yeah, jump in.
Thank you. You know, I believe we unify a party by building a team, not by mudslinging, not by running down other candidates, trying to slander their character. And I believe that leaders have to play by the rules, be it in the government's case, respecting a fixed election date, or in the case of our own leadership race, respecting the rules laid down by the executive committee. A leader has to build a team. A sign of who is a good leader is who can build the best team around them, because no leader is smarter than everybody else together. Many times, a good leader doesn't even have to be the smartest guy in the room, but they have to have good people around them. Brian Jean has the vast majority of nominated Wildrose candidates supporting him right now. Nearly all candidates, as of about a week ago, who were nominated are supporting Brian Jean. He has the best fundraisers in the party supporting him. He can raise the money to fight an election, and he can attract the best staff. So when we're talking about who can build a team that can move us towards government, we've got to ask who can build that team around themselves. The leader is not just one spokesperson. The leader is not just the shepherd of a bunch of people. The leader has to be surrounded by key lieutenants who know what they're doing and can build up the team around them. And one of the concerns that a lot of people legitimately had about Wildrose beforehand was that the team just wasn't there. That in the last election, it was the Danielle Smith show. That between that time, she did not do sufficient work to build up others on the team. And I think we should look right now about who has the team, because there's probably going to be about 48 hours to a week at the absolute most between our leadership announcement and the drop of the writ. Who has the team right now? Who has the candidates supporting them? Who can attract more good candidates to fill in those slots right now? We have to run 87 candidates. Which of the potential leadership candidates right now is going to attract quality people that we can be proud of to be on the ballot?
I wonder if I could
let Linda and Drew jump in here. You guys have all been very polite, not talking over one
another. We have been polite.
Let's have a discussion.
I'd like to actually, if I can kind of comment here, and very much as my comments before about with the Premier and getting results and some measurables, I'd like to see, from the leadership candidates, exactly some measurables and some successes, pulling a team together and actually putting a sustainable plan together and actually executing and getting some results. This is important. You can state as much as you can state, and it's I can do this and I can do that. But a lot of times it's your track record. And a track record is really important to make sure you kind of bring to the table a lot of experience regarding putting teams together in regards to not only if it is into government or if it's more and less in regards to community. I think it's those successes, and I do believe that, I do have a lot of that success, and it is measurable in regards to having so much for us to actually speak on behalf of the residents and fight for them. So, it's well and dandy to state these things, but I'd like to see some, concrete evidence that actually has brought a lot of this to the table and actually can move this province forward and can fight for the province for these, issues. So it's I'd like to see where some of these comments can come from and actually some results, because it's easy to just put a lot of this platitudes out there and say, I can. Well, show me the money.
Drew, do you want to make a quick comment, and then we'll go to a Twitter question?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll just add that, this is unique in the sense that it's a very, very, very short leadership race. Shame on Prentice. PCs will do anything to hold on to power. In the last election, they had an election law that they said they'd do it once every 4 years. The PCs felt a 4-year fixed election period would help them win then. Now here we are only 3 years into that election law, and of course the election law they drafted was so flimsy that they can call an earlier election and do it at a time when many good Albertans aren't ready, when many good Albertans could use the choice. It forced our executive committee to make a decision to move the race up, which makes good sense, and I fully respect. I like to contrast it, though, to what's going on in Ontario right now, where the Conservatives are having a leadership race that 6 people for 9 months went around the province of Ontario. I believe they sold something like 60,000 memberships. My goodness, what a great way to engage the people in Ontario about their province, their politics. We're doing the same thing here in Alberta, but like really compressed into a 3 or 4 week period, because Prentice is going to call an illegal election. In that 3 weeks, I think I've been to 25 or so different communities, and many Tim Hortons and lots of A&Ws, lots of coffee crowds, lots of Albertans that genuinely want to leave the province stronger for the next generation. They know it's time for this wasteful, entitled government to go. And those are the things that they talk about. Wildrose members, somewhere over 24,000 of us, that have all these good ideas, that want measured, careful ideas, want to talk about ways to get more infrastructure for hard-earned tax dollars, want to get better health care, want to have property rights. Affordable utilities is a big thing I hear wherever I go. People's utility bills have skyrocketed because of the way the PC government has handled Bill 50, letting 2 lines being built without needs assessments. So I guess the further reply to this is, in a very short period of time, the 24,000 members of the Wildrose are engaged and are talking and are presenting the ideas and choice that Albertans expect us to.
Okay, we're rapidly running out of time. It's amazing how quickly an hour goes by, but we do want to get to some Twitter questions. So I'm going to throw this one out there, and I invite any of you to jump in. The question's from Richard Lauder, who's Kuwaka, I think is how you say it on Twitter, which is an awesome name. And his question is, what's your WRP position on disabled funding like AISH and AADL? So assured income for the severely handicapped, or Alberta Aids to Daily Living. And we're happy for you to expand that to be a little bit broader about social services in general, but maybe let's try to keep it a bit brief.
Yeah, I'll just do it real quick. Okay, just basically, people with disabilities in the last 2 years were actually told by this government that their grants and their funds were going to be decreased, and the processes had to be changed. It caused a lot of unsurety. It caused a lot of displacement. So one of the second policy that I was going to work on, and actually is implementing it's calling a caring economics policy, and this looks specifically on caring and caregivers in regards to not only children, seniors, and people with disability. It's policies and money and financing in regards to these areas of need. And when we have fiscal restraint, as we're seeing right now, the very first thing that falls off the table is programming for people with disabilities, seniors, children, and families. So this policy of implementing a caring economics policy, it comes down to the #1 resource of this province is protecting our people. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. I'll just add to that. When we were first elected in 2012, the Wildrose fully supported the increase to AISH. Short time after that, we discovered through some of our constituents that there was a gap when a person receiving benefits turned 65, and there was a significant drop in what funds were accessible to them. So we lobbied it and won that battle as well. Wildrose members everywhere I go are happy to have their hard-earned tax dollars go to the services where people need them. It's the levels of bureaucracy that have been put in by this government over the last 10 years especially, the levels of bureaucracy above frontline workers, above the frontline first level of management. Wildrose, we had a FOIP out 3 or so weeks ago, 100,000 people in Alberta Health Services, most of them not frontline workers, 9,500 of them making over $100,000. And of course, we all know the stories of sole source contracting, big severance pays, public servants being hired back, and the expense accounts. Prentice's second big failure was on the Accountability Act. He clearly said when he wanted to be premier that he was going to address all that. And at the end of the day, all as he did was make those rules for political staffers, not the entire public service. Again, a huge failure in the way Prentice protects hard-earned taxpayers' money.
Okay, Derek, anything you want to add, or happy to move on?
I'll keep it pretty short and sweet, but we've seen from top to bottom in this government, it's a focus on process, not outcomes. It's a focus on bureaucracy, not frontline workers who know what they're doing. What I want to see is us focus, not just in terms of age, but on social services in general, on big service, not big government. Focus on empowering not-for-profits, people who do this because they love it. Empowering not-for-profits that have volunteers and giving them the resources to provide for the needy. Drew said it right there, that most taxpayers don't mind opening their wallets to help people who are truly in need, as long as that money is being spent well, spent wisely, and spent with respect.
Okay, Ryan, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. So thanks, guys. A quick question. What would your strategy be to elect Wildrose members in Edmonton and the Edmonton region? We'll go Drew, Derek, Linda.
Did you catch that, Drew?
No, I'm sorry. Ryan doesn't move on all. Could you paraphrase it for me? I couldn't hear a
Yeah.
word.
So we're gonna go Drew, Derek, Linda, and the question is, what would you do to elect candidates, Wildrose candidates, in the Edmonton area?
Oh, okay. Well, absolutely. It's back to our policies and our platforms. More efficient government. Everybody wants their hard-earned tax dollars to be spent wisely. The biggest word I hear in my constituency and my travels around Alberta all the time are waste. People are tired of the waste. Second word is entitlement. They're tired of the entitlement that they see in this government. So we put in a true accountability act with true limitations on how we pay severance pay, on rehiring and the eligibility to collect severance pay, similar to what is in the private industry. One of the government's main jobs is to keep it fair between public servants and private workers, and a lot of statistics show that is straight. So the hard-earned taxpayer, public servant or not, recognizes that they need value for their dollar. Infrastructure is probably the biggest one. Again, our provincial government claims they're building schools, and they're still working on Stalemac schools. The statistics show that we're spending $1,800 per year per person on infrastructure. Ontario and BC are only spending $900 and getting just as much infrastructure. In a government that we truly show that we are getting the infrastructure value for the taxpayer that's needed, Edmontonians will like that as well. And then from there, it's a matter of candidates that do the work, engaging Edmonton voters, having the ideas from the campaign that are based on our principles of healthcare that works. In the last election, our health time wait guarantee, as an example, was really popular, and that idea was that 10 healthcare procedures, if you couldn't get into a public hospital and get them in a wait time according to the Canadian wait time guarantee, the government of Alberta would pay for you to go to a different jurisdiction. We believe all that would have happened was it would have given incentive for our good frontline workers the opportunity to make things happen. So again, I think if we, when we show our plans for healthcare that works, affordable utilities, less bureaucracy, and value for the taxpayer, Edmonton voters will like what they see.
Okay, and Derek, how would a Brian Jean campaign elect more Wildrose members in the Edmonton area?
Well, geographic proximity, it helps, although it's not everything. Brian being a leader from the north will help. However, I don't think that's the biggest factor that will help with electing Wildrose MLAs in the north and in Edmonton. I think the big thing that'll help is that Brian, as I said earlier, can attract the best team. He could attract the best candidates, the best talent. Brian has the support of a lot of Edmonton area candidates, great candidates like Kathy Rondo, who have a chance of winning. Edmontonians are and Northern Albertans are distinctive. I mean, we're all Albertans, but we all have our own regional quirks, and we look for different things sometimes, and sometimes we look for a common denominator. Sometimes that's solid, fiscally conservative policy, and we all agree on that. But what's going to give us the decisive edge? That is having strong local candidates, a leader who can attract those candidates, who can attract that team. I think, the number of candidates supporting Brian overwhelmingly points to the fact that he's the guy who can do that.
Okay, thank you. And Linda?
Well, basically, Edmonton is the capital of Alberta. And for so many years, I've heard a lot of Edmontonians saying we need to have representation here in our own backyard, not only taking from, this is from Wildrose, and making sure that municipal people who are interested in government are able to come to the table. So the relationship that that I've had in regards to the capital region really identifies that people care that they are the capital of Edmonton, that they are the blue-collar workers, they are the ones who have the feet on the ground. They totally, want to have someone who speaks up on their behalf. The civil servants are definitely living in the Edmonton area. We do have a very high passion for what's happening in our own backyard, but also care about the rest of the province. Fort McMurray north with all the industry up there, and of course corporate Calgary, and south to Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. Everyone, as was mentioned by Derek, have unique demographics and geographic. But Edmonton really requires to make sure we have a team. There is good candidates. There is a northern rep that actually brings us together, brings the candidates together, and actually ensure that the communication within those candidates are there. We need to make sure that all across the province, and that's why it's been exciting with this leadership race, that we have 3 candidates from every corner of this province, and that the conversation about Wildrose and how we can improve and go forward is at the table. But let's bring the capital back to Edmonton. Let's make sure that where the history for Edmonton area is remembered. It's not only Champion 1, but I think the people in and around Edmonton want to make sure they have a loud voice and a good representative, and I will work hard and fight hard for their respect. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're at the top of our hour. It's amazing how quickly these things go, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so if you're still watching, thank you so much. What we'd like to do is close with some final remarks from each of our guests tonight. And maybe we'll do that in reverse order for how we started, which means, Linda, you're going to be up first. We've covered a lot of ground tonight. We talked about the Premier's television address. We've talked about some of the history between the Wildrose and PC Party. We've done a few questions from Twitter and covered quite a bit of ground, I think, considering we only had an hour. So now we'd like to give you guys an opportunity to just give us some closing thoughts. So, Linda, you're up first.
Well, it's time for change. And I believe that the 2 aspects of principles and policy I brought up before, the one on the fiscal framework, and then of course caring economics. There's one last one I'm passionate about, and it's a policy about the Alberta labor and energy sector, and it's focusing on jobs and job creation. 31,000 minimum jobs are being lost as we speak. We need to even ensure, how do we keep these people employed? How do we make sure that we can keep them in this province? So a labor strategy is crucial. It is a relationship and a partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, with the school systems, with post-secondary, and of course the levels of government. And a concept that I would really like to see, of course, keeping universities and post-secondaries in the prospective cities, but satellite centers where people can place their transitional and transferable skills that they've acquired, no matter if they're 18 years old or 65 and 70. Everyone has a transferable skill. Everyone needs to work, and I believe that's a third area I can concentrate on. Well, a few weeks ago we talked about, and we heard the apprentice talking about looking at a mirror, and I'm thinking that the Tories need to look at the mirror at this point and and reflect on maybe some shortcomings that they've had for many, many years. So I'm just asking the people of Alberta, make sure they come out to vote. My goal is to reignite the spirit and energy of Albertans, to make sure that we can invigorate the Wildrose Party, place these three aspects on the table, and ensure education and healthcare, the prime pillars of our government, is moving forward. So vote Linda Osinchuk. You can reach me on www.lindaosinchuk.com or at my email. So I'm there to fight. I do not give up, and my passion is people, and I will be here to lead this party to an exciting time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Linda, and best of luck to you. So Drew, unfortunately, we've got you in the middle, so hopefully that's cool with you, and I invite you to give us some closing thoughts.
It's fine. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing this tonight, guys. First of all, it's about three things. It's about trust. Every Wildrose member I talk to, Albertans I talk to, tell me consistently they do not trust Prentice and the PC government to spend our hard-earned tax dollars wisely and to run an electoral system fairly. Hence the illegal election a year early, the Accountability Act so underachieving, and as I mentioned earlier on, we have the most expensive government in Canada on a per capita basis. Wildrose members are telling me they can trust me. For 5 years, I've been working hard as a Wildrose member. For 3 years, I've been working hard as MLA for Cypress-Medicine Hat. When I was critic of infrastructure and transportation, I produced 4 reports, 2 of them co-authored, 2 on my own. Since then, I've been I've been critic rather of ESRD, finance, education, advanced education, and human services. Albertans are also telling me it's about financial responsibility. They want a government that has respect for their hard-earned tax dollars, prioritizes the spending properly towards front lines and infrastructure on time and on budget. My past success graduating from the U of A with a business degree, being in business, construction, real estate, and ranching, I've shown Albertans that I have the ability to lead and I have the ability to get them value for their hard-earned tax dollars. The third thing is about good opposition. The Wildrose, all 24,000 of us together, the Wildrose caucus has been the best opposition in Alberta's 110-year history. Didn't do everything right, but we sure did a lot of things right. We learned a lot. We shed a lot of light on areas where there was waste and entitlement and where the student and the patient wasn't put first. Under my leadership, those things will happen. We'll have a government that we can trust, a government that cares about hard-earned tax dollars and knows how to lead. Thanks again.
Thank you, Drew, and best of luck to you. Okay, last but not least, Derek, thanks for sitting in tonight. Our thoughts are, of course, with Brian and his family, and I'd invite you to give us a few closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Ryan and Mac and Dave, everyone for having me, and everyone who's joined us tonight. Again, I enjoy being here, but I don't want to be here because I wish Brian could be here. And it's, you know, Brian cares passionately about this province. He is in it for the right reasons. He is a real conservative. He is a real Albertan, and he believes that Alberta needs a real conservative government and a new government. He is a real principled conservative. What we saw from Jim Prentice tonight was a plan to make Albertans pay for the mistakes and mismanagement of his own party. That after years of waste, corruption, and mismanagement, the PC party wants to raise taxes on Albertans. We need to provide them with a principled opposition, but we need to provide them with an opposition that looks viable and credible. We don't have time for a leader to learn on the job. We don't have time for a leader to learn the ropes in 48 hours. A leader has to be ready and credible on day one. we will have 48 hours, likely, between our leadership election and the beginning of this illegal election. We should look to a leader who can attract candidates, who we can be proud of in all 87 constituencies, who could attract the best team around him to form a shadow cabinet and eventually a governing cabinet, who can raise the money in a short period of time to ensure we are a viable electoral force. Remember that one-party states do not remain one-party states because the party in power is brilliant. They remain in power because the opposition parties marginalize themselves. They choose to be big fish in small ponds. I don't want to be a big fish in a small pond. I want to be a part of a new government, a new Wildrose, fiscally conservative government. And I know who my choice is, who will give us the best chance of getting there. Albertans are ready, but they want a viable choice. They want a credible choice, not just any choice. Brian has gone from opposition to government. He has done the hard work of going from a new party that most Canadians did not trust to replacing a tired, old, center-left government and building the trust of Canadians broadly. We need to do that here in Alberta. Let's show Albertans that we are ready. I believe Brian Jean is ready, and he is the man to do that for us. I would strongly encourage you to stand with me in supporting him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again to all three of you for joining us tonight and for answering questions and for a good discussion. I think it was quite interesting, and for everyone watching, you can share this online with everyone else. It'll be archived on YouTube and at abvote.ca. So thank you for tuning in and watching tonight. I'd like to thank Ryan Hassman on Twitter, Dave Cornway on Twitter, daveberta.ca. Check out his blog for the latest list of nominated candidates from around the province, and myself, Mac Mail, I'm Master Mac on Twitter. Thanks for joining us tonight. Stay tuned to abvote.ca for upcoming episodes. Good night.
Good night.
Hey, folks.
Good night.